Our next speaker is Gagan Biyani. I met Gagan, I think, 5 years ago when I was at Founder Institute. Back then, he had left TechCrunch. He had started working on Udemy, and obviously Udemy is awesome. But then he decided to do Sprig. I'm a loyal customer. Awesome customer service, awesome food, fast, and really, I think, inexpensive. And then he also does the Growth Hacker conference, right? Anyway, so whatever Gagan does, it's cool. He also advised Lyft. I don't know. Gagan's just a cool guy. He's smart. And anyway, so I want to have him talk about some of the trials and tribulations and things he's learned and experienced. So welcome, Gagan, from Sprig.
Thanks, Nima. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone, for taking your morning to come listen to some of us speak. My goal today, I'm going to spend sort of the first 10 minutes or so, maybe 5 if I can keep it short, to talk a little bit about my background and some of the lessons that I've learned at Udemy and Sprig. And then I will move into Q&A. I asked the team if it was okay if I spent most of the time on Q&A, not because I don't have a talk prepared. I have a few of them, but more because I find that really the goal of a presentation like this is to answer your questions. And so that's really, so start thinking about questions as I tell you about my story, and that way, sort of in 5 or 10 minutes, we can spend the rest of the time just serving your interests. So a little bit about me. I grew up in Silicon Valley, but I really came to Silicon Valley in about 6 years ago, as Nima alluded to, and really knew nothing about technology or entrepreneurship besides what you could read on the internet. And what I was fortunate enough really early on to get two pretty big breaks. The first break was that I had the opportunity to become a writer at TechCrunch. And so I was a sort of intern, but the great thing about being an intern at TechCrunch is that they let you write stories and publish on the homepage. So it didn't really matter whether you were unpaid or paid. I got what I wanted, which was I had the exposure of being a writer at TechCrunch, 3 months after I had ever heard of TechCrunch, which was fun. And then the second thing I did was I joined the Founder Institute. And in the process of joining the Founder Institute, I had been trying to start various companies. And sort of 2 to 3 months into the Founder Institute, the company ideas I had all failed. And so for whether it was team reasons or just me recognizing that the idea wasn't going to become as big as I'd hoped, I was kind of stuck in a pretty awkward spot because I was enrolled in a startup incubator, and theoretically the goal of graduating that incubator is to have a company, and here I was, without a company and without a team. And I had the good fortune of spending the next sort of 3 to 6 weeks meeting with entrepreneurs, sort of hiding from the founder of the startup incubator, trying to pretend like I had a company going when I really didn't. And I met with a bunch of different founders, and I finally met these 2 brilliant engineers from Turkey who grew up in a one-room schoolhouse who had this vision for Udemy. How many people here know what Udemy is? Fantastic. 5 years ago, if I asked that question, the answer would obviously be silence. So it's amazing to see. And so they had this vision, for the world that was, everyone should have access to a high-quality education. And having grown up in a one-room schoolhouse where they had, very little sort of, sorry, I need to start a timer because I realized that I need to keep on track. So having grown up in a one-room schoolhouse where the only way that they learned was by using the internet, even at a really young age, and most of the math and science that they got was from the internet, they felt like it was an opportunity. And so I heard that vision and decided to join them. 6 months later, we raised our first round of, a year later, we raised our first round of financing. I became a co-founder. A year and a half after that, we raised our second round of financing, which was a Series A. And today, Udemy is the largest online marketplace for education on the internet. And it was an amazing grind. And really at Udemy, my job was everything aside from product and engineering. And that means building the marketplace. That's the primary job that I had, which was getting instructors onto the platform and getting users onto the platform. And then I also was responsible for fundraising, PR, internal operations like HR, legal, finance, as well as sort of anything else that was required, whether that be cleaning up the trash or whatever else. So that was my role at Udemy. And I think the main lesson that I learned at Udemy that I don't think I fully realized was how important it is to get product market fit right. And early on in a company, there are many very little strategic decisions that you make that have an outsized impact on your potential success. So it's not that it's easy, but you can will your way to a company that gets to $1 or $2 million in revenue, right? There are lots of little companies out there that can do that. But we made some core strategic decisions early at Udemy that allowed us to get to what today, I can't share numbers, but is tens of millions of dollars in revenue. And the core decisions were first, that we decided to make the marketplace completely open. So if you are familiar, how many people here are familiar with Coursera or Udacity and Khan Academy? So there are dozens of companies starting in online education at the time that Udemy came about. We were on the earlier end of this trajectory, but dozens of companies formed after us and before us. And as a result, there were a lot of key strategic decisions that we made that made us unique and that sort of put us in a position to succeed long term that at the time were not obvious. In fact, they were so not obvious that no sort of top tier or even second tier or even third tier VCs would fund Udemy. It was almost entirely funded by folks who are not even based in Silicon Valley. We had a firm in Chicago that did our first round and a firm in New York that did our second round because nobody here thought what we were doing was very interesting. And at the same time, 5 years later, most of the other companies that I've already mentioned in this talk are not at a position which is as strong as Udemy, in large part because of three core strategic decisions. The first one was the decision to make the marketplace open and not constrict the supply of the marketplace. The second one being that we decided to charge for courses and allow people to pay for courses and therefore sell courses on our platform. And the third one being that we provided an opportunity for the third one being that we focused on recorded education as opposed to live education. And what's interesting is people often ask me, like, okay, what was the success of Udemy based on? Like, what happened? And it's important to realize that all of these insights were derived, those three insights were derived from two core philosophies. The first philosophy is that companies are built based on missions, and you absolutely need to have a vision for the future in order to build a really big company. At Udemy, the mission and the vision was that at some point in the future, you'd be able to go online and learn from the leading expert in the world on any subject, at the touch of a button. And that was that was the vision of Udemy. And so every strategic decision we made was based on whether or not it aligned with that vision. That begs the question, why would you charge for courses, which is an oft-controversial decision, was a very controversial decision that we made at Udemy early on. And the reason was because we felt like the leading experts would not teach online if there was not a financial incentive. And so that's why at the end of the day, Udemy is a paid-for platform as opposed to a free platform like our competitors. And that ended up being true because what ends up happening today is we have 50,000 plus courses on the Udemy platform, and most of our competitors have hundreds and have had trouble scaling anything beyond that. And then the second core philosophy that I have about building companies is listening to your user base and being extremely customer-driven and realizing that you should eliminate your ego with your idea. So while the vision of Udemy has always been stagnant, the execution has dramatically changed, and that's critical. So instead of being the type of entrepreneur who says, I have this vision, and oh, by the way, every little detail about this vision is right, and being extremely resistant to change, we were kind of the opposite, to a fault to some extent. Sometimes at my current company, people get frustrated because I'll change my mind every 3 to 6 weeks about a certain strategic decision, and they'll get ping-ponged around, right? But The reason for this is that we're constantly in search of what the customer wants. And so the other core strategic decision early on at Udemy was the idea that we would have live courses as opposed to recorded courses. Udemy was built on the foundation, actually, and this was the original vision of Udemy, that you would be able to access a live instructor at any point you wanted. So you'd go online and you'd be able to learn English from someone who was teaching it right then and there, or at least teaching it a couple days in the future, mimicking the existing classroom environment where, of course, a professor has to be present in order to have class. And again, one of the fascinating things here is that, of course, most people thought this was a good idea. At the time, almost every venture investment in education was going into live education platforms. And what happened was, instead of trying to intellectually consider the debate between live or recorded, I just went and started selling the Udemy platform, which at the time was live. So I would just start pitching instructors day in, day out. I hired a team of interns. The interns would reach out en masse to instructors via email who were teaching online already, and we would try to convince them to come join the Udemy platform. And then I would try to convince customers to come join the platform. And by actually doing the work of trying to get the product off the ground, I realized very quickly, like, this product's never going to get off the ground. Because people don't have on the internet, people are much more on-demand focused. They need to have instant gratification. And so recorded courses made a lot more sense because once a course is online, you could press a button and buy it. And so I think it's interesting that these strategic decisions come out that make such a big impact on your long-term success, but are really, in a lot of ways, defined by these two core ideas of having a mission and then talking to your customers. The second example is Sprig, my current company. Now, given that we're down in the South Bay and we're not available here, I'm curious, how many people have tried Sprig or know of Sprig? A lot fewer. Wow. So we're in San Francisco today. Something like 1.5% to 2% of the San Francisco population uses this every month. And Sprig is essentially on-demand food. The idea is anytime you're hungry, you can open your phone, press a button, and get a meal delivered to you in 10 minutes that's hot and ready to eat. Today, the average delivery time in San Francisco is 15 minutes. And all of our meals are responsibly sourced and use clean cooking techniques. So one of the main focuses of Sprig is that our vision for the future is that you don't have to choose between quality and convenience when it comes to your food. You can both get something that's extremely affordable and convenient, a la the fast food world. And then you can also get something that's of high quality, a la something you would cook yourself, or Whole Foods, or a fine dining restaurant. And our vision at Sprig is to marry those two things. And again, one of the interesting things that we did at Sprig early on was that instead of trying to ruminate over the potential outcomes of what this market would be like or trying to envision the future, we just started selling Sprig to people. So within 3 weeks of coming up with the idea for Sprig, we sold 40 meals to customers in San Francisco. And a week later, we sold 80 meals. 4 weeks later, we did a week full of selling meals to customers, and we learned so much more in the first 12 weeks of our business than most people learn in the first 2 years of their business because we just went out and frickin' did it, right? And we didn't build technology. The first version of Sprig was a map of San Francisco on my coffee room table. That was our first dispatch system. If you imagine Uber's dispatch system being a very sort of algorithmically intense sort of system that routes cars intelligently in a city. Well, our first system was literally me with my head and Google Maps and a map of San Francisco and moving settlers of Catan pieces, each of which denoted a different driver in the city to different parts of the city to dynamically route our drivers to the right locations. And so that's really where Sprig came about, was again the same thing as Udemy, which is like, hey, we had a vision, which was to eliminate the choice between convenience and quality, to make it simple to eat well. And from there, everything was up for grabs. The execution was entirely up for grabs and was entirely based on the focus of Sprig on the customer. And so we eventually decided to do hot food in real time, healthy food, et cetera, largely based on trial and error. So my plan for trying to focus on Q&A didn't totally work out. However, we do have about 5 minutes for Q&A, and I want to now open up the opportunity for anyone to sort of ask me questions about Sprig or Udemy or entrepreneurship in general.
Yeah, one thing you seem to be really great at is conveying the vision and boiling down to a very sound vision. Can you talk a little bit about your process with those two companies that you spoke of, and coming up with and boiling down that vision to something that's clear, concise, and easy to convey?
Totally, it's an excellent question. So I would say that this is totally a trial and error type of thing. So a lot of people, when they come up with an idea for a company, they tell maybe one or two close family members or friends, and then they sit and either they code or they build or they find engineers or whatever, but it's all done in a very clandestine manner. My personality is the exact opposite. As soon as I have an idea, I'll tell everybody. Like, there's not a single person, if I'm like talking to a girl at a bar, like 5 minutes into the conversation, chances are if there's an idea on my mind, it comes up in conversation. I'm like, what do you think about food on demand? And she's like, who the hell is this guy? Like, but that's really works, because what happens is that I practice. I'm essentially constantly practicing my pitch, because I'm constantly telling people, and then I'm watching their facial reactions, and I'm telling when they're bored. I'm checking whether or not they're really interested. I'm checking their questions. And if their questions imply that they didn't understand, I totally screwed it up, right? And so that's a lot of how I craft the vision. And then the other thing is just understanding that you have to have a vision and focusing hard on spending time on articulating it and whiteboarding out the different words. And so, at Sprig, we came up with the words, make it simple to eat well. And it's the vision that we've sort of created for the product, and I think now we're moving into a new vision statement, which needs to be more broad, which is make eating well simple for everyone, which is sort of where my head is currently going with it. Yeah, great question.
Can you talk a little bit about methods to figure out what your customers or your pre-customers want, and how much feedback do you need to actually make a decision?
Yeah. Second question first. I find very little feedback, actually. So I find that generally you can have 5 to 10 conversations if you're good at it. And the first time you'll probably want to do 25 to 30. But 5 to 10 conversations with customers, and you can learn almost everything you need to know. And by the 5th or 6th conversation, you're pretty much just redundant. You just hear redundant answers. Now, on the first part, much harder, I primarily go in 2 modes in terms of customer development and understanding people. The first one is purely understanding the customer. So it's purely explorational. So we started in the food business, we just asked people what they ate for dinner. We asked them questions like, hey, what did you eat last night? What did you eat last week? Why did you eat that? What made you choose that versus the other things? What were the other options you had? Like, essentially what drives your decision for what you're going to eat for dinner every night? And that's exploratory. The second thing that I do is I do what I would call confirmatory customer development interviews, which is more what I talked about earlier, which is just pitching the business and seeing what the reaction is. And so, like, at Lyft, for example, where I was an advisor and helped them in their early stages of growth in LA, the process was first meeting with various Uber and Lyft and taxi users in LA and bringing them to buying them coffee, and then just ask them questions about their transportation habits. And then the next, after 2 days of interviews, then I went out to the bars and handed out Lyft cards, street teamed, wore a giant pink mustache on my belt, and went out and actually pitched the business to customers and saw their facial reactions. So that's kind of how I do it. And then the final thing I'll add is that it's really important to be as egoless as possible in those situations. Like, it really doesn't matter if your idea is right. That's really important to recognize. I think that's the most important thing, is the approach to these interviews is that it doesn't matter whether you're right or not. All that matters is what the customer wants. And being egoless and submitting yourself to the customer's will often allow yourself to come to the better conclusions. All right, I think I have like one more question.
Yeah, thanks. First off, thank you for making Udemy. Like, the quality of courses in terms of like whenever I need to learn anything, it can't be matched. Second of all, like just in terms of growth, you said you like to talk to people to like learn more about what they think, but how do you get those initial customers, and how do you get customers beyond like 100 customers?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the important thing to realize about growth, are you talking about consumer for the most part?
I'm working on enterprise, but yeah, same thing, yeah.
I know very little about enterprise. I mean, other than just what I would read in a book or something. But on the consumer side, and I think it'll apply to enterprise as well, look, the goal is to, through those customer interviews, to find out everything you can about what the customer's thinking when they're making a purchasing decision. What time are they making a purchasing decision? Where do they find out information that leads to their purchasing decision? What types of people do they recognize as important in their decision-making process? And if you do a good job of asking those types of questions, the marketing and the sales techniques will just float to the top. All of a sudden, you'll start to see patterns, and you'll start to see, like at Lyft LA, the best example was that in Lyft San Francisco, the biggest need for an average customer for Uber or Lyft is, I need a car fast, and it's cheaper than a taxi. Cheaper than a taxi was like the vast majority of what made Lyft super interesting. The second thing was that it was sort of a community and fun experience, and the final thing was that it was reliable. Well, in Lyft in LA, the opposite was true. It was a little bit reversed. Cheaper than a taxi was still the most important thing, but reliability was more important than the quality of the service. Because in LA, if you call a taxi, you just wait, and you wait, and you wait, and nobody comes. And so they had a more basic need than people in San Francisco. They just needed a goddamn car. And so the marketing message was all about, hey, this is going to get you a reliable car. Like, get a car in 10 minutes. You're going to get the car. Like, that was the guarantee that we made. And I think that was like an interesting insight that came through customer interviews. And you'll find other growth and marketing techniques in the same way. Yeah. All right, thank you so much,
Awesome.
everyone.
Thanks, Gagan.